Welcome to the Language Fuel podcast. Our mission is to fuel the teaching and learning of languages worldwide. I'm your host, Joanna Smith. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Language Fuel podcast. We are now up to episode number 22. Today, I want to talk about the idea of networking for language teachers. And the reason why this is in my mind recently is I've had a very stimulating couple of weeks recently. There was a couple of language seminars here in New Zealand. So rather than an annual conference, which is every second year, this year the different regions were holding shorter seminars or smaller occasions. And I was invited to be there as part of my role in the resource room. So selling resources, books and prizes and games and things like that for language teachers. And it was just so wonderful to connect with a lot of people, some people who I'd, emailed with previously in that role, and other people who I just met, on the day, and we talked about where they're teaching and, what their issues are and so on. So it was really great to connect that way. I also had the privilege of attending recently an e-learning showcase. I am a member of the New Zealand Association of Training and Development, and they hosted a showcase for one day where lots of different businesses in the Auckland area in particular, although there were people from further afield, got 20-minute slots to showcase some of the e-learning that they're creating in their businesses. And I was one of the presenters there, and I really loved seeing the kinds of projects that other people are working on. And of course, in the morning tea breaks and the lunch breaks and so on, it's wonderful to connect with people and talk about their projects and how they're going and so on. Sometimes connecting with old friends, sometimes just meeting new people. In any case, in all of these three cases, I did meet new people, and I found it very, very energizing, and it was wonderful to get some new ideas for myself. So it just made me realize actually how important networking is to keep up your own energy, for teaching as well as just your personal and social energy. Some of the things that you get from networking are just new ideas. So sharing the creativity load, I guess you could call it, because as language teachers and educators in general, you're constantly coming up with new ideas, new materials. Your target market, if you like, the students that you're teaching are changing all the time with different habits, different attention spans, which obviously, as you know, they're reducing over time. So you can't teach the same way you've taught for your whole career. You've got to keep learning new things and integrating these new ideas. So why not share those ideas? And I know a lot of people are really good at this. So if I am preaching to the converted, I do apologize here, but it's just a fabulous way to share that creativity load. It's also great to learn about new technologies. One of the technologies I learned about recently from a colleague of mine, it was PlayPosit. And I was so excited about it. We've ended up making a course for the Language Fuel Academy on how to use this technology. So we actually integrated two other technologies as well, Edpuzzle, PlayPosit, and Visia. They all do very similar things, but they're a little bit different. It's a wonderful tool to create interactive videos. So we have created a course. If you're interested, you can have a look at the Language Fuel Academy at what that's all about. But one of the wonderful things about PlayPosit in particular is that there are already teachers on there who are sharing the material that they've created. So you can search for other interactive videos that have already been created and use them yourself, because that's, how it works. So it's a wonderful little thing. Now, in terms of networking, I thought I'd talk about a couple of different things. First of all, what types of networks are there out there that you really should be connecting? What your role in a network might be, and then finally some tips for networking if you needed them. So there are obviously different ways to network. You can network online if that's all you have time for, and certainly it's free. There are Facebook groups out there for teachers who are teaching whichever language you're teaching. Some of you are probably listening because I am a member of a group that you belong to. I've purposely chosen, for networking reasons, to join many groups online. So I may have met some of you online there. Certainly, even just following people who are tweeting or blogging about language teaching is another kind of informal, perhaps a passive way of going about networking. Connecting to LinkedIn groups, all of those online ways are very effective. But I have to be honest, they're not quite as effective as face-to-face networking. And I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago now, and I sat next to somebody who I had never met before. And she introduced herself. We had name badges on, and she says, "Oh, yes, I love your website," and blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, I wonder if she's just being polite because, we're relatively new, less than a year old, certainly. And I'm not sure if she is really talking about my website because I've never interacted with her before. But then she carried on and talked about some really specific things that were there. And I thought, yes, she is actually talking about my website. And she had been there many times, and we had a little discussion about some of the resources that were available. And I was quite surprised because I had never interacted with her, even through email or anything. Uh, we had a lovely, pleasant day sitting next to each other at this meeting, over a cup of coffee, had a little chat, got to know each other a little bit personally. And the next week, she placed an order at the resource room for a book, one of the books that were talked about at the meeting that we were at. And I thought, oh, that's nice. She's made a book order. That's great. I certainly wasn't necessarily there to get a book order out of that. I just was networking, but it was a positive outcome. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, her organization placed an extremely large order with us. And I thought, wow. And when I looked in the records of the resource room, sure enough, they had actually been customers several years ago, but for whatever reason, this particular organization had stopped purchasing from the resource room. So that physical face-to-face contact with this person had reignited a relationship between our two organizations. So again, that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't face-to-face. Not because of lack of information, because she certainly knew exactly what I did, and had been on my website, knew exactly what we were producing, the books for sale, the online courses, and so on. But yeah, just that face-to-face really made all the difference. So I have come to believe, and there's a few other examples I could talk about, that's just one of the most recent ones that sticks in my mind, that face-to-face interaction is super important. So attending those conferences, making the effort to go to meetings is actually worthwhile. I'm hearing, ideas. People are probably saying, "Oh, I don't have time. I just really don't have time to go to these meetings and actually meet people and so on." But I guess my only thing I would suggest to you is it's a matter of prioritization, as with everything. That's time management. It is a prioritization issue. And I always, think back to that wonderful metaphor that Stephen Covey uses in his famous, quite old book now, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. His final habit is sharpening the saw. And the metaphor, of course, is, if you're cutting wood with a saw, if it's not sharp, it's going to take you twice as long to get your job done. Whereas if you take the time out to go ahead and sharpen that saw, even if you're really busy, it will make you much more effective in the long run and you'll get it all done faster. So, wonderful metaphor to keep in the back of your mind if you're not familiar with it yet. I think networking events and so on are those times when you get to sharpen the saw. Now, he uses that, of course, in a personal and in a spiritual sense as well. He's quite overt about saying, and in physical, we need to look after our bodies. We need to make sure we're looking after our families and our key relationships, that we're nourishing our spiritual self. But obviously, in a professional sense, it's exactly the same as well. So I would suggest that it's worth blocking out some time, making the effort, blocking out some budget as well for that professional development to get it done. Now, in terms of roles in networks, there's a couple of different research things out there showing the types of social roles that people play in networks. One of the lists of roles, and you can just sort of Google this and you'll figure out some more information if you are interested. This is a list that's in one of them. So some people are great connectors, and they're also called liaison people. And these are the people who love connecting people that they know with other people that they know. So if you're drawing a social network diagram, and you may have seen some of these before, they sort of have dots for the individual people and lines between them. They are often the people that are connected with multiple circles, if you like, or multiple clusters, and they love connecting people with others. That's a wonderful role that a lot of people do play. Some people play the role of gatekeeper in a network, and kind of like a judge. Are you worthy of being in this network or not worthy of being in this network? And that may sound a little bit snobbish or something, but actually it has a very important role for keeping standards high in certain networks, certainly in certain professional networks. Think, for example, of editors who are writing magazines or editors of books. You've certainly got to make sure that the quality that you're about to publish is high enough to keep those standards. So that's another very important role in a network. Another role that they talk about is a broadcaster or representative, where they communicate what a particular network is all about and pass on the messages, the key messages from that network. Another role is coordinator. Another role was pretty self-explanatory. Another one is peripheral specialist, where they input into the network from a standpoint of expertise. Often they stand a little bit outside the network, but bring it in through connectors and so on. And the last role that is in this particular group is a lurker, sometimes called an isolate, where they may not be a really integral part of a network. They're sort of sitting on the fringes, but they can often become connectors, or sometimes they can become specialists who input into a network. So they still are important members of that network, sort of like a latent potential there. Uh, that is a complicated list of words. There's another group of words that I've heard talking about networks, which I love. It's much easier to remember, certainly. And there's just three roles. One is called the worker, one is called the shirker, and one is called the lurker. So a worker is someone who's really active in the group. A shirker is someone who really doesn't do much, but they sort of sit on the outside. And the lurkers are very observant, but again, they're sitting on the outside, and you kind of never quite know when they're going to activate and do something, but certainly very important. So maybe you could think about yourself and the different groups that you belong to. What role do you play in those groups? And probably in different groups, you play different roles. You may be a really active worker in one particular network, and in another, you could be just a lurker. I tend to be on social media a bit of a lurker. I love to belong to many different groups and just read, see what people are talking about, listen to what issues they're facing, particularly with language teaching groups that I'm a part of on social media. Seeing what people are struggling with, what problems they're having, gives me ideas as to how we can help solve them here at the Language Fuel Academy, either in the podcast or through creating online courses. So those are where some of my ideas come from, just from lurking in these groups. And occasionally I feel like I'm a connector as well, and pass on different pieces of information to different groups as I see is important, and I enjoy that role as well. Now, the final thing I thought we'd do today is talk about tips for networking. Now, teachers generally are not necessarily shy people, shall we say, is to put it mildly. Certainly in front of a classroom, they usually enjoy being the center of attention, and certainly with training as well, they're usually very good at managing groups of people. So it's not about being shy. I'm not assuming that anyone's shy necessarily in terms of not networking, but I guess sometimes it can be a little bit awkward coming to a group where you may not know anybody, and there may not be somebody introducing you, so you kind of have to make the first move yourself. And it's always a little bit awkward. What do I say? What's appropriate in this situation? So I thought I'd gather a couple of tips that I've collected over the years, and things that seem to work for me, and share them with you, so that when you do attend networking events face to face, and some of these could potentially apply online as well, you have a few tips up your sleeve, so you're not kind of standing there and not actually making the most of the opportunity of being there. So the first tip is just make eye contact. That's the first step in any start of a relationship. Look the person in the eye. And then the second step, which goes closely with that, is smile. You know, nobody is going to get upset if you're going to smile at them. Everybody appreciates a smile. Even if that's all you do, it's a great first start. And you can even practice that with people, even strangers. Make eye contact and smile. That's always a fantastic way to begin. If you want to then introduce yourself, just offer your hand. Hi, my name's Joanna. And usually the natural thing is they'll shake your hand and tell you their name as well. So that's obvious, a nice, easy way. Now, the only reason I do mention that is that in different cultures, certainly in professional cultures, sometimes for women in particular, and I know our listeners here on the podcast may not necessarily be women, but probably around 50% of you are. It's a little bit awkward. Do you shake hands? Do you not shake hands? Are you supposed to hug? Are you supposed to kiss? There are different rules, and I've noticed in New Zealand over the last couple of decades, things change as well. So it's much more common now to give women kisses on the cheek, even people who you may not necessarily know very well. So the things do change, and I guess you need to be a little bit sensitive to that. But there's no harm in offering a handshake to start with. Even women offering handshakes to men, sometimes men are a little bit confused. They don't know what to do. Am I supposed to shake a woman's hand? They are usually very comfortable shaking each other's hands, men to men. So if you're a woman, just offer your hand and get over it. Offer your hand. If someone goes in to kiss you on the cheek, offer your cheek as well. But certainly there's no harm in offering your hand first. So make eye contact, smile, offer your hand for a handshake. Hi, my name's Joanna. And when the person's introduced themselves, ask a question. Ask a question that indicates that you have something in common. So, for example, if you're at a seminar about language teaching or about technology, whatever the seminar happens to be, there must be a reason why you're both there. So, in a language teaching context, the most easy question is, so where do you teach? Where are you teaching right now? Or which language are you teaching? Something obvious that indicates you've got that in common with them. You're both language teachers or something like that. In a more generic sense, where you might not actually know what their professional role is, you can talk about something that you have in common. Maybe look at what they're wearing. If you particularly appreciate an item of clothing or an accessory that they have on, I'm thinking about women obviously there, you could say, oh, I really like that brooch. That looks, really nice. And just a compliment, where did you get it? Can then be followed by a question. So again, something in common is that you have a similar taste in clothing or fashion or something like that. Even something as simple as, did you have to drive far to come today? Again, the fact that you're both attendees is something at least that you have in common there. So asking a question or else complimenting someone, those are very, very easy discussion starters. And usually most people will respond in kind and they'll keep the conversation going. It's always a good idea if the conversation does slow down a little bit to ask them about themselves. People love talking about themselves, so think of a couple of questions to have up your sleeve about what you could ask them about themselves. So if it's a language teaching conference, how long have you been teaching? Oh, lovely. And have you been teaching at the same school? So just talking to them about their career and letting them tell you about themselves. And you might find some things that you have in common that can, again, trigger further conversation. If the conversation is generally going nowhere, the person is feeling a little awkward, you can tell, just say, well, lovely to meet you, and move on. You don't need to spend ages talking to one person, particularly if it's getting awkward. So just thank them, smile again, and say, nice chatting, and walk away. The second part of networking, which is sometimes neglected by a lot of people, is the follow-up. So if you did find that you had a bit of a rapport with someone and you had some things in common, why don't you follow up with finding them on LinkedIn, for example? Or if you did swap business cards, if that was the kind of environment that you were in, send them a quick email when you get home the next day or something like that. Say, hey, it was lovely chatting to you. It would be great to keep in touch. Are you on LinkedIn? Or, make some kind of a connection just to thank them for meeting them. And you never know where your network could eventually take you. Again, another situation recently for me, I swapped business cards with somebody who worked at a language school in the city, and we did follow up on social media and via email. And, we're already talking about ways that we could potentially partner in a particular project that was relevant for both of us. So, again, wonderful idea just to quickly follow up, and you never quite know where that will lead. One final tip that I have for you is if you're attending a event where there are speakers that you are listening to or watching, if they're presenting something, sometimes it's nice to proactively go and speak to the speaker afterwards and thank them. Sometimes, these speakers, they've done a lot of preparation and they're kind of putting themselves out there to present and share their creativity, their ideas. Not all speakers get feedback afterwards. Sometimes, and you might not know, it could be their first time presenting in public about a personal project that they're working on. So it's usually very welcome for these kinds of speakers to receive a bit of feedback. And even if it wasn't that interesting, you could just thank them. Thank you for the time and effort that you went to for that presentation today. I appreciate that. I mean, that's all you need to say. You don't need to be flattering if it's not going to be realistic, but you can just thank them for their time. And again, that's a bit of a connection. So those are some of my ideas. I hope you found them a little bit useful. Some people are extremely good at networking and others less so. So it's always good to put yourself out there. And like I've said a couple of times already, you never know where new relationships can lead. Good luck. Keep up the networking, both online and in face-to-face situations. Feel free to connect with us here at Language Fuel. We are on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, so love to connect with you there. Reach out and let us know how you're finding the podcast. Keep in touch, and I'll be seeing you around. Ka kite. Thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can navigate to the show notes and links via our homepage at www.languagefuel.com. See you next time.